On the one hand, you can say that we're kind of in a multiverse moment right now, everything everywhere all at once, Marvel Cinematic Universe, Spider-Verse.
Rick and
But in
Morty.
another yeah. But in another sense, you can say like, oh, movies like this have been popular for a long time. Stories like this have been popular for a long time. So we're always in a multiverse moment. So which of those two camps do you come down on?
Down on the we're in a multiverse moment side, because yes, while it's true that you can say that there's always sort of been a multiverse idea that's existed of some kind, there still have been typically different dominant languages that we've used. The Odyssey is they're sailing across the sea. And that's kind of how do we explore the reaches of the human imagination. And then it was, outer space, it's Star Trek and Star Wars and Dune. And it's, that's the language of like, what's another world that we can go to. And there's time travel. And you see a lot of those things. The multiverse, again, like you would have things like The One, like you're saying, or you would have, different comic books and different ideas. But the fact, it seems like it's everywhere. The dominant sci-fi language does seem to be, if we're trying to explore the reaches of our imagination, it does seem to be the multiverse. And it does cross all of these different things. I was just realizing, Sonic the Hedgehog is doing the multiverse. And again, back in the day, they wouldn't use the multiverse to explain Sonic's different worlds he enters. They would not use that word, and they would just say, these are just different land masses or areas in there. But now, why not use the multiverse? And I think that says a lot about the time we live in, that we live in an era where we have anxiety about our choices even more than we used to, because we just have so many more choices than we used to. And we have much more responsibility to act on them. That Gilles Lipovetsky, who's a modern French philosopher, he's written this book called Hypermodern Times. He sort of noted that the entire modern world project is essentially a consequence of a bunch of thinkers and influential people who were trying to expand human flourishing through dismantling institutions that limited human freedoms. Essentially, like, we're getting rid of the monarchy and replacing it with democracy in order to political freedom. Then we're going to, have capitalism so that people have economic freedom. We're going to have religious freedom, separation of church and state so people have religious freedom, etc. And the 60s, that kind of really flourished, where people saying, okay, so there's no limits on our human freedom per se. We could just move to a different town, move to a different church, buy for a different business. So now we can create our own meaning, like in a really powerful, strong way. Then he says that's the postmodern era. But then he says the hypermodern era is what he calls it, is when we have this anxiety of to quote BoJack Horseman, responsible for my own happiness, I can't be responsible for my own breakfast. So we have this anxiety about the fact that we really can shape our lives. We don't have to be the blacksmith like our father did. We don't have to. But along with that is this horror that our choices have real consequences and we don't know what we're doing. And so again, the farthest reaches of our imagination, what the cosmos are like, really does feel like it's affected by our choices. But those choices still don't feel really meaningful because, on the flip side of that, because we're so much more disconnected from people nowadays, both in our work and our relationships, we don't see the effects of our lives on other people in other world. So, Karl Marx gets a bad rap because he was a horrible person who created a horrible philosophy, but he did make an excellent point, which is that we used to, in our work, have, if you made a horseshoe, every day you would see the horse that was wearing that shoe. So the effects of your life and your work were visible to you constantly. But now, you make an iPhone, it's like you make this little widget that's made in a thing that you don't assemble, that's used by somebody you never see. And then, of course, because people are getting married later, people are not living in interconnected communities as much, we don't see how our lives are in real time affecting real people. And so simultaneously, we feel like our choices have incredible consequences. But on the flip side, we feel like our lives are kind of meaningless. Those choices don't affect anything. So you have this idea of the multiverse where every choice you make, it splits you off into one where you make the opposite choice. But that means simultaneously your choice has a lot of effect, but it doesn't have any effect because, what does it matter what you do? Somewhere else, something else happened. So, you have a lot of these stories like Rick and Morty, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, that take that to its logical conclusion of, of it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. I mean, Rick and Morty does this thing where they destroy everyone on Earth and then they just find another Earth where they died and everyone's the same. And it's like, well, so what does any of this matter if we're just all interchangeable and replaceable? And then, you have, like you said, there is the theoretical physics side of it, which is interesting on one hand, because it is this idea of how do we account for the fact that we see potential in the world that gets actualized in a way that seems like, based on how we observe it, it shouldn't happen just one way. And so we're very confused by that. And so some people, also use it as an excuse for, it feels like we're designed, maybe it's not. So it's like an excuse to get God out of the equation. But what I'm interested in is that's sort of separate from how it's captured the popular imagination. And why is it, and there's aspects of, like you said, community that get out there, because again, with the rise of cities, with the rise of social media, we're able to curate our communities to people who are like us. So there's the positive side of it that things like Into the Spider-Verse deal with, where it's like, oh, I can find my people. I can find the people like me, the Spider-Men of the world. And so there's that positive side. And then there's just the fun side of like, there's the postmodern kind of religious side of it, which is that I don't have to pick my God. I can pick between different ones. So it's like, oh, like I could pick between my Spider-Man. They all exist. All of them are real. All of them exist. So there's this toy box of how fun it is to imagine that the endless possibilities of choices. So you don't have to make a choice. It does, but on this existential crisis of, well, if we can choose anything and there's no real meaning, none of it matters. And so I would say that the reason that the multiverse is popular right now is it is the way that we're able to talk about what it feels like to live in a postmodern world, both the exciting possibilities of it and the anxieties and depression that it kind of brings us. And that's a really fun toolbox to play in, because it is the way that human beings are saying what is going on in my personal life is reflected in the metaphysics, in the cosmos. And I think human beings have an innate desire, rightly so, to say, what's my place in the cosmos? That's the part of it that's the same as anything else, whether you're doing outer space, whether you're doing, a fantasy, whether you're doing, the Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. Like, here's where people are. Here's where heaven is. Here's where here's where the angels reside. And then there's hell underneath, and putting yourself in that place. I think the multiverse is the modern way that we do that. And that was why it was so fun for me to explore in my film.